There is a name written in the Bible that does not belong there. Not because someone made a mistake. Not because a scribe slipped. But because the man this name belongs to never once prayed to the God of Israel. Never walked through the gates of Jerusalem. Never bowed before the Ark of the Covenant. He was a pagan. A conqueror. A man who worshipped foreign gods in foreign temples. And yet God called him by name. Personally. Intimately. As if he were one of his own. I have called you by name, though you have not known me. Isaiah 45:4. The name was Cyrus, king of Persia, founder of the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. A man whose armies swallowed nations whole from the mountains of Anatolia to the plains of Central Asia. A man history would later call the Great. But the Bible calls him something else entirely. In the book of Isaiah, written over a century before Cyrus ever drew breath, God gives him a title that had never been given to any foreign king before. A title so sacred, so loaded with meaning, that Jewish scholars would wrestle with it for generations. Mashiach, the Anointed One. The same word used for King David. The same word used for the priests of the temple. The same root word that would one day become Messiah for Christians, point directly to Jesus Christ. God gave that word to a Persian king who had never read a single line of Torah. If that unsettles you, good. It should. Because what this story reveals about how God moves in human history is not comfortable. It does not fit the need categories most of us were handed in Sunday school. It raises a question that has haunted theologians, historians, and ordinary believers for more than 2,000 years. Can God use someone who doesn't believe in Him to accomplish what even His own people could not? The answer the Bible gives is not maybe. It is not sometimes. It is a clear, documented, historically verified yes. And the proof is a man named Cyrus the Great. But this is not just an ancient story buried in dusty scrolls. Right now in the news, in global politics, in the quiet fear of millions asking where the world is heading, the land of Cyrus is at the center of everything again. Persia, Iran, the same soil, the same ancient stage. And there are serious people, pastors, scholars, historians asking whether the God who used Cyrus once is still in the business of using the unexpected. This is that story. From the very beginning. Stay with me, because by the time we reach the end, the way you read your Bible, the way you watch the news, and the way you think about God's hand in human history will never be quite the same. This is what we do here. We go deep, we go honest, and we let the story speak. Welcome. To understand why Cyrus matters, you first have to understand what the world looked like before he arrived. And that world was broken. Not broken in the way we use that word today casually, loosely, to describe a bad week or a difficult season. Broken in the way that only total collapse can produce. The kind of broken that happens when everything a people has ever believed in, their land, their temple, their king, their God, is taken from them all at once. That is what happened to Israel. In 586 BC, the armies of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, ruler of the most powerful empire on earth, marched into Jerusalem and did not stop until there was nothing left to destroy. The walls came down. The gates were burned. The houses of the city were reduced to ash and rubble. And the temple, Solomon's temple, the house that God himself had commanded to be built, the place where the Ark of the Covenant rested, the center of Jewish worship and identity for 400 years, was torn apart stone by stone and set on fire. Let that image sit for a moment. 400 years. That is longer than the United States has existed. Imagine every sacred place, every national symbol, every monument to who you are as a people gone in a single season. And it did not stop there. Nebuchadnezzar did not simply destroy Jerusalem. He emptied it. The skilled workers, the priests, the nobles, the scribes, the musicians, everyone who could think, build, teach, or lead was marched 600 miles east to Babylon in chains. This was the event the Hebrew Bible calls the exile, the Babylonian captivity. And for the Jewish people, it was not just a political catastrophe. It was a theological crisis of the deepest kind, because everything their faith rested on was now gone. The covenant with Abraham had promised them a land. That land was now occupied by foreigners. The covenant with David had promised an eternal king on the throne of Jerusalem. That throne was shattered. The temple, the very dwelling place of God among his people, was a pile of ruins. And the question that haunted every Jewish heart in Babylon was not political. It was not when will we go home? The deeper question, the one that kept the priests and scholars and ordinary families awake at night, was this: did God lose? Is Marduk, the great god of Babylon, whose temple rose higher than any building in Jerusalem ever had, is he the true God after all? Did Yahweh abandon us? Did he fail us? Or worse, does he even exist? This was the spiritual darkness into which Cyrus would eventually walk. But before we get to Cyrus, we need to understand Babylon itself. Because Babylon was not simply a powerful city. It was a statement, a declaration about how the world worked, about who was in charge of history. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar was the center of the known world. Its walls were so wide that chariots could race side by side along the top. Its hanging gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, rose in terraced levels above the desert plain like something from a dream. Its temples to Marduk and Ishtar were stocked with gold, stripped from a dozen conquered nations. Its markets traded in goods from Egypt to India. And its population of captives, Israelites among them, lived and worked and slowly, quietly, began to forget. That is the most insidious thing about exile. It is not the violence of arrival. It is the erosion of time. The first generation of Jewish exiles wept. Psalm 137 captures it with devastating honesty. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. They hung their harps on the willow trees. They refused to sing the songs of the Lord in a foreign land. Their grief was raw and total. But grief fades. Decades pass. Children are born who have never seen Jerusalem. Grandchildren who have only heard of the temple as a story their grandparents tell. By the time 50 years had passed, and then 60, And then 70, the Jewish community in Babylon had become something complicated. Some had prospered. Some had assimilated. Some had married into Babylonian families, taken Babylonian names, built Babylonian lives. And the dream of return, the desperate prayer of the first exiles, had grown faint, almost unbelievable. This was the world in 539 BC, a people scattered, a faith under siege, a temple in ruins, a promise from God that seemed, by every measure of human observation, to have gone silent. And then, from the east, from the mountains of Persia, from a people that no one in Babylon had taken seriously until it was far too late, came the sound of an army. Not an army like Nebuchadnezzar's. Not an army that burned and slaughtered and enslaved. Something stranger. Something that the ancient world had almost no framework to understand. An army with a different set of orders. His name was Cyrus, and he was coming to Babylon not to destroy it, but to walk through its gates in peace. Not to crush the captives, but to set them free. The broken world was about to meet the man God had called by name before he was born. Before Cyrus became a legend, he was a problem nobody took seriously. That is the part history tends to skip over. We know the ending. We know the empire. We know the name. And so we read the story of Cyrus backwards with the arrogance of hindsight, as if his greatness was obvious from the beginning. As if everyone could see it coming. They could not. When Cyrus first rose to power around 559 BC, he was the king of a small, relatively insignificant territory called Anshan, a vassal state in the southwestern corner of the Persian plateau. His overlord was the Median Empire, ruled by a king named Astyages. And Astyages, by every account, did not lose a single night of sleep over the young Persian king in the south. That was his first mistake. What Astyages could not see, what almost no one could see at the time, was that Cyrus was a different kind of leader. Not just militarily, though he was brilliant in battle, but philosophically, spiritually, even in a way that is difficult to categorize. The ancient world operated on a simple, brutal logic. You conquer, you destroy, you humiliate, you replace. Every great empire before Cyrus had followed this formula. The Assyrians were famous for it. They would impale their enemies on stakes outside captured cities as a message to everyone watching. The Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar had refined it, stripped the conquered people of their identity, their religion, their language, their name. Turned them into Babylonians. Erased them. Cyrus looked at that formula and chose something different. He built his empire not primarily on terror but on tolerance. When he conquered the Medes around 550 BC, he did not execute Astyages. He absorbed him. When he swept through Lydia in western Anatolia and captured the famously wealthy King Croesus, whose gold had made him a legend, Cyrus spared his life and kept him as an advisor. When city after city fell to Persian forces, Cyrus made a habit that stunned the ancient world. He let the people keep their gods, not as a weakness, as a strategy, and perhaps as something deeper. There is a text that survives from this period, a clay cylinder, baked in ancient Babylon, inscribed in cuneiform that historians call the Cyrus Cylinder. It is one of the most remarkable documents in human history, and in it, Cyrus describes himself not as the champion of the Persian gods alone but as the chosen instrument of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, sent to restore justice to a city that had suffered under its previous rulers. Think about what that means. A foreign conqueror deliberately presenting himself to the conquered people in the language of their own theology, telling them, "Your God chose me. Your God sent me here to help you." Whether Cyrus genuinely believed this or whether it was the most sophisticated political messaging the ancient world had ever seen is a question historians still debate. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps Cyrus had an intuition, shaped by a lifetime of crossing cultural and religious borders, that the divine was larger than any single name or temple. What we know is this: it worked. Brilliantly. By 539 BC, Cyrus had built the largest empire the world had ever seen. Stretching from the Aegean coast of modern Turkey to the edges of India, over 2 million square miles of territory, the Achaemenid Persian Empire dwarfed everything that had come before it. And it had been assembled, to a remarkable degree, without the scorched earth brutality that had defined every previous empire. Cities that resisted faced Persian military power, but cities and peoples that surrendered were, more often than not, treated with a restraint that bordered on the astonishing. And then came Babylon. The fall of Babylon to Cyrus in October of 539 BC is one of the most dramatic moments in ancient history, made even more dramatic by how undramatic it actually was. According to the ancient sources, including the Babylonian Chronicle and the account of the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus's forces diverted the flow of the Euphrates River, which ran directly under the walls of the city, and his soldiers walked in through the riverbed, under the walls, in the middle of the night. The city, by some accounts, barely fought back. The last Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, had been deeply unpopular. He had neglected the temples of Marduk. He had angered the priests. He had spent years away from Babylon on religious expeditions to distant oases, leaving the city in the hands of his son Belshazzar.
The city is under attack.
The population, already alienated, offered little resistance.
Pay him no mind.
And when Cyrus entered Babylon, he entered not as a destroyer. He entered as a liberator. He ordered his soldiers not to loot the temples. He restored the statues of the gods that Nebuchadnezzar had removed. He presented himself at the great temple of Marduk. And then, in a decree that would echo through history, he announced that all the captive peoples held in Babylon were free to go home. All of them. Every nation. Every people. Every religion. Including, of course, the Jews. Pause here for a moment and feel the weight of that. 70 years.
By the word of the king,
2, sometimes 3 generations of exile. Children born in Babylon who had grown up hearing their grandparents weep about a city they had never seen. And now, a Persian king, a man who had never read their scriptures, never prayed to their God, never set foot in their land, was handing them back their freedom. Not because he had to, because he chose to. And somewhere in the heart of every Jewish exile who heard that decree, something ancient stirred. A memory. A promise. A word spoken generations ago by a prophet named Isaiah, in a text that suddenly, impossibly, made sense. I have called you by name. If God could shape the most powerful king in the world into an instrument of liberation for his people, what might he be shaping in the stories you cannot yet see? What is being prepared right now in the places you are not looking? In 1879, a British archaeologist named Hormuzd Rassam was digging through the ruins of ancient Babylon in what is now modern Iraq when his team uncovered something small, cylindrical, and covered in tiny cuneiform script. It was about the size of a football. Baked clay, chipped at the edges, nearly 2,500 years old. They brought it to the British Museum in London, where it was cleaned, catalogued, and studied. And as scholars slowly translated the dense Akkadian text pressed into its surface, they realized they were holding something extraordinary. Not just an archaeological artifact, a declaration, a philosophy, a moment in history frozen in clay. The Cyrus Cylinder. Today it sits in the British Museum, one of the most visited objects in the entire collection. The United Nations has called it an early charter of human rights. Historians cite it as the first written declaration of religious freedom in recorded history. And for anyone who has ever read the book of Ezra in the Hebrew Bible, it is the physical, tangible proof that what the scriptures describe actually happened. I am Cyrus, king of the world. When I entered Babylon in peace, I did not allow anyone to terrorize the land. I kept in view the needs of the people in all their sanctuaries to promote their well-being. I freed them from their undeserved bondage. And then the line that changed everything for the Jewish exiles. He ordered that all captive peoples held in Babylon, their gods, their sacred vessels, their temple treasures be returned to their homelands. That they be allowed to rebuild their temples. That they be allowed to go home. Now turn to the book of Ezra. Chapter 1. Verse 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm. Ezra 1:1. Read those two documents side by side, the Cyrus Cylinder and the book of Ezra, and something remarkable happens. The secular historical record and the sacred biblical text are telling the same story. From different angles, in different languages, for different audiences, but the same story. This is not common. For much of biblical history, we have the scriptures account on one side and silence on the other. No external confirmation. No archaeological parallel. Scholars debate, skeptics doubt, believers trust. But here with Cyrus the ground shifts. The clay cylinder in the British Museum is not a religious document. It was written by Persian scribes for a Persian king to justify Persian imperial policy to a Babylonian audience. It has no theological agenda, no reason to align with Hebrew prophecy, and yet it does. That convergence, that moment where the secular and the sacred point to the same event from opposite directions, is one of the most quietly powerful things in all of ancient history. And most people have never heard of it.
Have you heard the news?
Now, what actually happened when the decree went out? The response among the Jewish exiles was not what you might expect. It was not a unanimous, joyful exodus. It was complicated. It was
have
human.
wandered long enough in this
Some
wilderness.
left immediately.
Look to the west.
The book of
towards
Ezra tells
Jerusalem,
us that
our
a group
eternal
led
home.
by a man named Zerubbabel, a descendant of the royal line of David, gathered together the heads of the families of Judah and Benjamin, the priests, the Levites, and began a long journey back to Jerusalem. They carried with them the
Blessed are you,
sacred
Lord,
vessels that Nebuchadnezzar
who has
had
kept us
stripped from the
alive
temple: gold
and
bowls,
sustained us to reach
silver
this moment.
dishes, knives, basins, 5,400 objects in total, carefully counted and recorded. But many stayed. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told. After 70 years in Babylon, a significant portion of the Jewish community had lives there. They had businesses, they had homes,
Thank you.
they had children and grandchildren who had never known any other world. The journey back to Jerusalem was 600 miles through desert and mountains. And what waited at the end of the journey was not a city, it was rubble. So many chose Babylon. They sent money. They sent support. They prayed for the ones who went. But they stayed. And the ones who went found exactly what they feared. Jerusalem was ruins. The Temple Mount was a field of broken stone. The walls were collapsed. The city that had once been the crown of their civilization was barely a ghost. They sat down among the ruins and they wept. And then slowly, painfully, with Persian imperial support and the leadership of Zerubbabel and the high priest Jeshua, they began to rebuild. The foundation of the new temple was laid with ceremony and tears simultaneously. Ezra records that the old priests and elders who had seen Solomon's temple wept so loudly when they saw the new foundation, because it was so much smaller, so much humbler than what they remembered, that people standing nearby could not tell the weeping from the shouting of joy. Grief and hope, side by side, indistinguishable. This is the texture of the return. Not triumphant, not cinematic in the Hollywood sense, but deeply, profoundly human.
Steady now, men.
A people
Push it to the
rebuilding
mark.
something that had been
By
taken from
sundown,
them with the
this
help of
force
a
will
king
be
who
laid.
owed them nothing. A king who, according to the prophet Isaiah, had been chosen for this moment long before he was born. Which brings us to the question that changes everything. How did Isaiah know? There is a passage in the book of Isaiah that has disturbed scholars, thrilled believers, and sparked one of the longest-running debates in the history of biblical scholarship. It is found in chapter 45. And it begins like this. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him. Isaiah 45:1. Read that slowly. Let it land. God is speaking directly to a man named Cyrus, calling him his anointed, his Mashiach. And he is doing it in a text that, according to the traditional dating of the book of Isaiah, was written somewhere between 740 and 700 BC. Cyrus the Great was born around 600 BC. He conquered Babylon in 539 BC. That means if the traditional dating is correct, Isaiah wrote the name Cyrus into a prophecy roughly 150 years before Cyrus was born. Before his parents were born. Before his grandparents were born. Before the Persian Empire that produced him even existed. A name, specific, unambiguous, written in advance. This is either one of the most astonishing acts of divine foreknowledge in all of human history, or it is the detail that launched one of the most significant debates in biblical scholarship.
Confirms the vowel pointing here.
Because
It
not
must be
everyone
read this way.
accepts the traditional dating. Let me give you both sides honestly, because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves a comfortable answer.
Blessed be the name of
The
his
traditional
glorious
view
kingdom
held by
forever and
Jewish
ever.
and Christian scholars for centuries, and still defended by many serious academics today, is straightforward. Isaiah wrote the entire book that bears his name in the 8th century BC. The prophecy naming Cyrus is genuine predictive prophecy. God told Isaiah the name of a king who would not be born for another century and a half. This is, in this view, evidence of divine inspiration that cannot be explained by any natural means. The critical scholarly view, which became dominant in academic circles beginning in the 18th century, argues something different. It proposes that the book of Isaiah was written by more than one author. That chapters 40 through 66, including the Cyrus passage, were written not in the 8th century, but during or after the Babylonian exile, possibly by a later prophet writing in Isaiah's name, a common practice in the ancient world. In this view, the writer of Isaiah 45 was not predicting Cyrus. He was writing about Cyrus as a contemporary or near contemporary figure, using prophetic language to interpret events already unfolding. Two views, both held by serious, intelligent, faithful people. Now here is my own perspectives, and I offer it not as the final word, but as one honest voice in a conversation that has been going on for centuries. What strikes me most about this debate is what both sides agree on. Both sides agree that the text exists. Both sides agree that it names Cyrus specifically, not a generic deliverer, not a vague messianic figure, but a man with a proper name. Both sides agree that Cyrus did exactly what Isaiah 45 describes. He subdued nations. He released captives. He allowed the temple to be rebuilt. The disagreement is about timing, not about what happened. And here is what I find quietly extraordinary about that. Whether Isaiah wrote those words in 700 BC or 550 BC, the theological claim at the heart of the passage remains the same. God is sovereign over history. God uses unexpected instruments. God calls people by name, even people who do not know Him, to accomplish purposes larger than any individual life. That claim does not depend on the dating debate. It stands on its own. But there is something else in Isaiah 45 that gets far less attention than the naming of Cyrus, and I think it is the most important part of the entire passage. God does not just name Cyrus. He explains why. For the sake of Jacob my servant, of Israel my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. Isaiah 45:4, though you do not acknowledge me. 5 words, and they reframe everything. God is not using Cyrus because Cyrus believes. God is not rewarding Cyrus for his faith. God is using Cyrus, a man who does not know Him, does not worship Him, does not acknowledge Him, for the sake of someone else, for the sake of His people, for a purpose that reaches far beyond the Persian king who is the instrument of it. This is, theologically, one of the most radical statements in all of Scripture. It means that God's sovereignty is not limited to the community of believers. It means that history is not only shaped by the prayers of the faithful. It means that God can and does move through presidents and generals and kings and conquerors who have never once opened a Bible. That is either deeply comforting or deeply unsettling. Possibly both. It is comforting because it means that no political situation, no geopolitical crisis, no empire, however powerful, is outside God's reach or beyond His capacity to redirect. It is unsettling because it means we cannot always identify God's instruments by their beliefs. We cannot always recognize what God is doing by looking at the labels on the people He is using. Cyrus did not know he was fulfilling prophecy. He did not know his name had been written in a Hebrew scroll generations before his birth. He was simply doing what great kings do, consolidating power, managing conquered peoples, presenting himself as a benevolent ruler. And God was doing something else entirely through the same actions. Two stories happening at once, in the same events, in the same history. This is the pattern Isaiah is pointing to. And it raises a question, a personal one, not a theological abstraction that I want you to sit with before we move to the final chapter. What if God is doing the same thing right now? What if there are two stories happening simultaneously in the events of our own time, the story we can see and the story we cannot yet read? What if the land of Cyrus, Persia, Iran is not just a geopolitical flashpoint, but once again a stage for something larger? That is exactly where we are going next. And if this question is alive in you right now, if the idea that God is still writing names into history before we can read them gives you something between hope and vertigo, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you think. Because this conversation is too important to have alone. We need to talk about Iran. Not in the way cable news talks about Iran. Not through the lens of sanctions, nuclear programs, proxy wars, or geopolitical chess moves. Those conversations are real and they matter, but they are not what we are here for today. We are here to ask a different question. A quieter question. One that does not get asked on news panels or in congressional hearings. Is the land of Cyrus still on God's map? Because here is what is easy to forget when we watch the headlines. The country we call Iran today, the Islamic Republic, the theocratic state, the adversary in so many Western political calculations, sits on the exact same soil as the empire of Cyrus the Great. The mountains have not moved. The rivers have not changed course. The ancient city of Pasargadae, where Cyrus built his capital and where his tomb still stands today, is still there in the Fars province of modern Iran, visited by Iranian schoolchildren and foreign tourists alike. The tomb of Cyrus, still standing, after 2,500 years. On it, according to ancient sources, was inscribed a message from Cyrus himself. Simple, direct, quietly magnificent. Oh man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who gave the Persians their empire. Do not begrudge me this little earth that covers my body. That inscription, if authentic, is the voice of a man who understood that empires are temporary, that power passes, that the earth outlasts the ones who conquer it. And yet his story has not passed. It has only grown stranger with time. In the decades since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which transformed Iran from a monarchy into a theocratic republic, something unexpected has happened in certain corners of Christian theology. Cyrus has been rediscovered, not as an ancient curiosity, as a template. The argument goes like this: if God used a pagan Persian king once to accomplish his purposes for Israel, why not again? If Isaiah 45 is a pattern and not just a one-time event, then what does the pattern look like when it repeats? This conversation entered mainstream American culture in a dramatic way when a significant number of Christian leaders and theologians began comparing Donald Trump to Cyrus the Great. The parallel they drew was specific. Like Cyrus, Trump was not a conventional man of faith. Like Cyrus, he was an outsider to the religious community he was being asked to serve. And like Cyrus, in their view, he was being used by God to accomplish something specific for the Jewish people and for Israel. The moment that crystallized this comparison for millions of people was the decision in 2018 to move the United States Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. For many in the evangelical and Catholic communities, this was not just a political act. It was a prophetic one. It echoed, in their reading, the decree of Cyrus, a powerful ruler, outside the covenant community, making a decision that advanced the purposes of God for his people in the land. Israel even minted a coin. On one side the face of Cyrus, on the other the face of Trump. Issued to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel. 70 years, the same number the Jewish exiles spent in Babylon before Cyrus set them free. Now I want to be careful here, because this is the kind of territory where it is easy to get pulled into a political argument that has nothing to do with the deeper question we are really asking. Whether you believe the Trump-Cyrus comparison is theologically profound or politically convenient, that debate is not the point. The point is the pattern itself. The pattern Isaiah points to is this: God works through unexpected instruments. God is not limited to the theologically correct, the religiously vetted, the morally uncomplicated. History is full of moments where the person God appears to be using is the last person anyone in the faith community would have chosen. Moses had a criminal record. David was an adulterer and a murderer. Paul was a persecutor of Christians before he became their greatest advocate. And Cyrus, the one explicitly called God's anointed in Scripture, never converted, never changed religions, never became a worshipper of Yahweh. He just did what he did, and God used it. This should not make us comfortable with moral relativism. It should not be used as a blank check to justify any powerful figure as God's instrument simply because we prefer their policies. The Cyrus pattern is not a template for endorsing whoever is currently in power, but it should make us humble, deeply, genuinely humble. Humble about our certainty that we know exactly how God works. Humble about our confidence that God's purposes are limited to the people and the movements and the institutions we already recognize as His. Humble about our assumption that the most important things happening in the world right now are the things we can clearly see and label and categorize. Because if the story of Cyrus teaches us anything, it is that the most significant thing God was doing in 539 BC was not visible to most of the people living through it. The Jewish exiles sitting by the rivers of Babylon did not know that a Persian king was being shaped, in a land they had never visited, to set them free. The Babylonian priests did not know that the empire they served was days away from being absorbed into a new order. Even Cyrus himself, by every indication, did not know that his name had been written in a Hebrew scroll generations before his birth. The most important thing God was doing was invisible until it happened. And then suddenly it was undeniable. This is the rhythm of Scripture. This is the rhythm of history. Long silences, invisible preparation, and then a moment where everything that was hidden becomes suddenly, shockingly clear. We are living in one of those long silences right now. The land of Cyrus is in the headlines again. The ancient tensions between Persia and Israel, between Iran and the Jewish state, are as raw and as dangerous as they have been in decades. The questions about what God is doing in the Middle East, about what prophecy means for our moment, about whether we are living in a time of significant spiritual and historical transition, these questions are not going away. And I do not have a simple answer for you. I want to be honest about that. I do not know exactly what God is doing in Iran right now. I do not know which leaders, if any, are being shaped as instruments of purposes larger than themselves. I do not know how this story ends. But I know this. The God who called Cyrus by name before he was born is still the God of history.
The God who planned
The
this
God who
before it
used a
happened.
pagan Persian king to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem is not surprised by anything happening on the news tonight. The God who wrote the end of the story before the beginning was spoken has not lost the thread.
Unbroken thread.
And that in a world that
history.
feels increasingly unraveled is not a small thing. That is everything. We started with a name that shouldn't be there. A pagan king. A foreign conqueror. A man who never prayed to the God of Israel and yet was called by that same God, his anointed, his chosen instrument. The one he had prepared, in secret, across generations, for a moment the world did not see coming. We have walked through the ruins of Babylon. We have stood at the gates of a city that fell without a fight. We have held in our hands metaphorically a clay cylinder that proves the ancient world and a sacred text are telling the same story. And we have sat with a question that does not go away.
What is it you seek in
If
this
God
life?
did it then, is he doing it
Do you
now?
truly believe this
I
is the
believe
way?
he is. Not because I can name the instruments. Not because I can read the headlines and draw a clean line from prophecy to politics. But because the character of God does not change. The God of Isaiah 45 is the same God of this moment. And his habit is consistent, recurring, almost stubborn habit is to work through the unexpected, the unlikely, the ones we would never have chosen. He chose a stammering shepherd to confront Pharaoh. He chose a shepherd boy to kill a giant. He chose a Persian king to rebuild his temple. He chose a carpenter from Nazareth to redeem the world. The pattern has never broken. So if you are sitting with uncertainty tonight about the world, about the news, about whether any of this means anything, let the story of Cyrus be a word to you. God is not surprised. God is not scrambling. God is not watching the headlines with the same anxiety you are. He is still writing names into history before we can read them. And the story he is telling through the most unlikely people in the most unexpected places is not finished. Not even close. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. If these are the kinds of questions that keep you alive and searching, subscribe. Because this is what we do here, every single time. And leave me a comment. Tell me, who is your Cyrus? Who is the unlikely
me,
person in your own
what is it
story
that
that
you
God
seek in
used
this
when
place?
you least expected it? I will see you in the next one.